Good morning and a very warm welcome indeed to today's Movers and Shakers virtual event. My name's Lee Natasha Salter and I'm Managing Director of Movers and Shakers. Now I know we've got lots of our members from across the UK registered for today's event, so welcome to all of you and also to our newcomers and to our viewers from overseas. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who don't know about Movers and Shakers, we're the UK's largest property networking forum. We've got over 25 years experience in bringing together the private and public sector leaders, creating great events. We have a programme of annual conferences. We have our famous breakfast forums, and we also put on private events for our members. We're really enjoying putting together at the moment these virtual events, and it's our 8th event today. So if you've missed any of our previous events, please do go to our YouTube channel and you'll be able to watch them, and do subscribe. Back to this morning. Well, today is one of our market insights presentations. The aim of these is really to just keep you up to speed with the market developments, market trends and information. This morning, we welcome Mark Farmer, who is Founding Director and CEO of Cast Consultancy. Thank you to Mark for joining us this morning. Now, you'll all probably know Mark best as author of the seminal Modernise or Die, aka the Farmer Report, which was published in 2016. Now, Mark and his colleagues at Cast have recently published a new report, the Construction Market Overview, a New Paradigm. And they've put together quite a detailed analysis and their own thinking on what are the likely commercial and practical delivery implications post-COVID-19 for the short and the long term for the construction marketplace and for clients. It's an absolutely fascinating read. I think it's a must read at this particular time. And we're fortunate that Mark is here this morning to present using slides for us this report. So the format for this morning is a 30-minute session. Mark will present the report, as I said, and then there should be time for some questions. So please do use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, submit questions, and we'll do our very best indeed to answer some of these this morning. I'm now going to hand you over to Mark. So thank you, Mark. Everyone, enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to rattle through fairly quickly a series of slides which effectively summarises the report that Lee mentioned that we have produced in the last 3 or 4 weeks, looking at the impacts of the coronavirus on the construction market. Hopefully you can all see that screen in front of you now. So 4 things I want to cover at pace. Firstly, a little bit of scene setting in terms of why I think the industry, we should be really concerned about the impacts of COVID-19 on the industry based on what's already happened. And I'll talk a bit about that in terms of the resiliency of the industry. I'll talk a bit about what's happened on existing projects, so live projects that are currently committed, and what we've seen in relation to the impacts of the health emergency on construction work. Then I'm going to talk a bit about longer term implications in terms of real estate and construction market, and what that might look like, including pricing indicators and where we might go around costs and pricing. And I'm going to close this by talking a bit about mitigation in terms of how clients, advisors, contractors can all start thinking about how they overcome some of the challenges that no doubt we've got ahead. So I'll start just in terms of this issue of resiliency, and resiliency is a word that's been used a lot over the last couple of months. And for me to best define it in the terms of the construction industry, I'd analogize it to a stress ball. So if you think about squeezing a stress ball, letting go of it, the resiliency is the ability of that stress ball to regain its shape and to show that it's elastic in relation to how it moves in and out. And what's really interesting, if you look at the construction market, and this graph here shows construction employment over the last 40 odd years actually, and you can see in tune with economic cycles, construction employment goes up and down. But what's more interesting is that at peak, when we have peak output before we have downturns, the level of increase has got gradually smaller and smaller until in the last peak from 2008 compared to 2018, 2019, actually we didn't achieve the full size of where the industry was before the financial crisis. So that resiliency, the ability to spring back into shape, has already been shown to be potentially undermined. And then if you look at construction employment as a percentage of total employment, there is a quite worrying sign in what I call asymmetric labour cycle. So you look at the percentage increasing again in recovery periods and then decreasing in times of recession. In the last 2 cycles, we've had construction employment growth that's got gradually slower and slower and shallower, which is the green dotted lines. And then when we've had downturns, the contraction in the labour market has got quicker and steeper, which is the red lines. So that shows you it's asymmetric, and it shows you in sort of the stress ball analogy that our industry is being undermined and eroded. So going into this current crisis, there's some concerns we should have about the dependency on labour and in relation to the construction model that we're all used to. Clearly, that's being further amplified by Brexit, and we shouldn't forget about Brexit. Obviously, it's taken a bit of a back seat in recent times in terms of media coverage, but a no-deal Brexit is still very much on the cards in relation to what may happen at the end of this year. And we're hearing rhetoric going back and forth at the moment between the EU negotiating team and Brussels, and we should be concerned about that from a perspective of the materials supply security and also the probably already well-known issues that we have in terms of inability to access the European labour market in the future. And that's the material element of that is really important because, as you can see from this graph, as an industry, we are massively reliant on imported construction materials. So if we get into some kind of trade war, or we have issues around tariffs, or we have issues around border logistics, construction is going to suffer on the back of that in relation to its dependency on imported construction. And all of that is compounded by this ongoing issue that's been well trailed, and I'm not going to over egg the omelette here, about productivity or lack of. So the fact that we're so labour dependent and we're so unproductive as an industry really exacerbates all those issues we have in terms of needing more and more labour to do actually the same or even less work going ahead. So thinking now about what's happened in the last 2 months in particular and the impact of COVID on existing construction projects, we've seen a whole range of different things happen in a very, very short period of time, ranging from projects stopping completely, and most projects have got to a point at some point over the last 2 months where they physically stopped, maybe not for long, but actually most have gone into some kind of suspension. Then there's been different ways, different attitudes being taken by contractors as to how they would reopen, probably mostly in the early part of March and the mid part of March, before formal government guidance came out in relation to the lockdown strategy and the public health guidelines. So we had instances, if you can remember, there's quite a lot of negative PR and media coverage of construction sites where you had a whole load of human contact at close quarters and lots of people speculating as to whether that was right or wrong. What we've clearly moved to now is more of an orderly approach where more guidance is being brought in from government and the Construction Leadership Council. We now have social distancing being observed on construction sites, albeit the 2-metre rule that most of us are abiding by is not necessarily strictly required now under the latest guidelines, which are these 2 documents here that suggest that actually independent risk assessments have to be made by contractors as to what's right and what's safe, and that may not necessarily mean sticking to 2 meters in terms of socially distancing. So what that's all meant is massive dislocation of activity on current construction sites over the last 8 weeks. From a labour perspective, we've seen output of construction sites fall away. But actually, interestingly, even though total output on sites has reduced quite markedly, in some instances we're hearing stories that individual output from individual workers has gone up because tradesmen are able to get on with their work in a less cluttered way, without interruptions, without falling over or tripping over other tradesmen on site, because the labour force is being delivered in a more measured way, which is quite interesting actually. But there undoubtedly have been big issues in terms of total productivity, issues around site restrictions in terms of working hours, new induction requirements required in relation to health and safety measures, big changes required to circulation, access and egress routing around sites, welfare facilities, etc. Issues with manual handling. So where heavy materials are involved and multiple people have to be lifting stuff, that's not necessarily possible now. We've had issues with plants and equipment where spares haven't been available. So we've had things breaking down on sites that haven't been able to be repaired. And we've also had third parties that are required to keep construction going, not actually able or willing to attend site, including consultant teams, building control inspectors and the like. And then on the material side of things, we've had obviously big issues with supply chains being interrupted, imported materials initially from China because they locked down first being interrupted, but then that moving to EU and other countries as well, leading to issues where even if the labour was available on site, lack of material availability has affected output as much as the issues around what you can and can't do on site from a labour perspective. So some big issues there from a labour and material perspective, all culminating in up to now has been anecdotally about 50-60% levels of total productivity at a site level. That varies quite a lot, and it is very site specific, and it's very much about where you are in the cycle of your project, whether you're in the ground, whether you're in heavy fit out, but that's an average position. And I talked about materials there, and the material supply chain is going to be really important going ahead as to how it recalibrates for the journey that we may or may not have in front of us. We've already had big shortages in certain areas, which you can see on the left there, are the key areas of shortage. And the material supply chain has got quite adept, particularly after the last financial crisis, in cutting off its supply if demand falls away. It doesn't want to have big unsold inventory ahead of it. And what's a bit concerning, and I'll show you two headlines here, one from 2008, just as the financial crisis was taking hold, quite a well-known material supplier there, talking about correcting its workforce, reducing supply. And then this from last week, the same company with double the level of impact already happening, and we're only two months into the crisis. So doesn't bode well at the moment in terms of how the material sector is going to get affected, but I think the overarching issue will be that it will manage its supply in line with demand. And then in relation to time and cost, big issues starting to appear in relation to the cost and time issues linked to the impacts I've already gone through in terms of delays. So we have contractors with prelims and site running costs that may not get remunerated under contractual provisions. It all depends on the nature of contractual risk. So lots of pressure at the moment in terms of how contractors their jobs are going to cost more, but may not have access to more remuneration under contracts. Sensitivities around liquidated damages in some instances where clients may feel that they have issues around their delay, and different attitudes being taken between contractors and house builders. I think house builders, even though there's been lots of press and media activity about reopening sites, are more nervous about pushing too hard on future construction because they're holding the risk on sales values for the construction that they're delivering. So whereas main contractors are desperate to get back to work to keep cash coming in, house builders I think are being a bit more measured. In terms of how this is playing out on mitigation effects of existing projects, we're seeing, certainly from a Cast perspective, we're seeing more and more discussions about how we might change the balance of methodology for work still to complete towards manufacturer-led approaches. And that may be near site, it might be just setting up a temporary facility to pre-manufacture or consolidate elements of work that would ordinarily have to be done on site in a labour-intensive way, which cannot now be done. We've had the extended working hour guidance from government, now able to work up to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. As I said, we've had some redesign starting to happen and a gradual switch where appropriate to some forms of MMC, which is usually at sub-assembly level and parts of buildings rather than anything more dramatic than that. And lots of contractors and consultant teams now fully embracing technology, working out how they can use digital technology to keep them going, particularly from a management perspective, validating progress, assisting with valuations, site inspections, etc., etc. And the beginnings of exploration of how different technical equipment on site can be used, including exoskeletons for manual handling assistance, autonomous plant, robotic processes, etc., which have always been at the fringes for the last couple of years, but contractors are now having a really good look at that. And all of that, I suppose, has got to be covered with the fact that we undoubtedly are going to have some contractual tensions ahead. Those issues around time and cost are going to play out. This is the best practice guidance that was issued by CLC a couple of weeks ago. It's important that advisors try and use this as a means of trying to diffuse tension. Obviously, parties have to protect their own interests, but it's really important we don't trash the industry at this really critical stage by going into a massive wave of disputes. So I say that with some hope, but also some concern that we're going to see issues ahead. And these graphics here just demonstrate from a couple of surveys that have been done in the last week. That one on the left there shows that perhaps up to a quarter of existing people responding to that survey think they're either in dispute or will be in dispute, which does not bode well. And then on the right, you see that in terms of solvency and financial risk, 71% of people questioned on that survey believe there's issues with solvency of their business. So summary of what this means for existing projects: price pressure, delays, uncertainty, risk of insolvency, and contractual tensions. So quite unfortunately, a negative outlook for projects that are already in play. If you then spin that onto the wider market or the longer term market ahead, this is all going to be about macroeconomics. So what's going to happen to the economy? What's the nature of the economic downturn? Is it a recession, a depression? Who knows, but it's going to be pretty dramatic. Who knows the shape of it, though, in terms of how quickly we can come back from that. What I do know, and this is a BCIS RICS document from January, which was written in good faith based on what we knew then. It was talking about a construction industry that was going to have price inflation, costs going up, GDP growth, inflation, interest rates going up. All of those things are now completely out the door. And if you look at that in the context of construction pricing, this was again the same document in January. You have year-on-year inflation to date, which shows the downturn that we had the post-financial crisis in 2009, 2010. And then the RICS have predicted 3 scenarios off to the right there in red, blue, and yellow, based on what they saw happening over the next 4 to 5 years. My view is that all of those are now completely irrelevant, and we're looking to a situation where, despite imminent upward cost pressures, and there's going to be massive upward cost pressures on existing projects, we're going to see a correction in the market, which is going to be demand led. There's going to be a lot less new projects coming forward. And even though we're going to have capacity erosion, there is a risk that we're going to have a deflationary pressure on prices. So that is going to potentially show itself anywhere between either static prices and in our view, down to 10% net deflation, and then a recovery dependent on what happens in macroeconomic terms. And the complexity of that forecast, and this is very much, I don't want to overgeneralize here because it's going to look different in different markets, in different parts of the country as well. It's probably going to be, deflation would be more pronounced in London and the southeast than perhaps it would be in the regions. The deflation will be coming out of certain parts of the price stack in terms of the construction costs, which I'll come on to in a second. This is a graphic which I'm trying to suggest shows that every time we go into an economic cycle in construction, the ups and the downs get much more amplified. And it's back to the slide I showed you earlier about the asymmetric market. Because we have this fragility and lack of resiliency, inflation is going to get steeper and deflation is going to get steeper as well. And it's going to happen over a shorter time period. This graphic here is one of the central pieces of the report that we published, which I'm not going to go through the detail of this now, I haven't got time, but the central scenario, as I've just said, indicates that we could have a longer term 12 to 18 month time horizon with either sort of generally static pricing or actually net deflationary pricing. But there's also scenarios where you could have inflation and what I call super deflation either side of that, depending on the shape of the recovery. The continuance of social distancing restrictions on site is going to be a key determinant of that, where you have productivity impairment. But you can see from that main graphic there that actually the direction of travel for different parts of construction pricing is in different directions. So labour, we anticipate coming down. Materials may well go up. Risk and OHP is likely to come down, certainly for the subcontract supply chain. So we feel there's a lot of complexity there in terms of net dynamic, but it's really important in all of this that actually you take a bottom-up approach to assessing input costs rather than just overgeneralizing. And just to really make a point, this headline came out last week. We were predicting a compression in labour rates for self-employed labour. Hudson, who I think it was Hudson, who one of the payroll agencies, already showing that labour rates are off by 30%, even in the last 6 to 8 weeks. So you can see this is already playing out in industry. And just to close by looking at mitigation measures. So, it's really important in the time ahead that consultants, advisors, actually contractors procuring their supply chains and clients do due diligence. It's about financial records and proof of credit. That's not going to be as simple as a Dun and Bradstreet. It is going to be about putting your ear to the ground and hearing what's going on, not propagating rumours. That's dangerous as well. It is going to be about what teams are being put forward for new work. Are you getting a first team or are you getting a B or a C team? You need to have the right people on your jobs. And what's their track record? I think we're going to see a move towards designing for resiliency. And by that, I mean trying to avoid an overly dependent site labour model. So bit by bit, contractors and designers and clients collaboratively looking at how much labour they can take out of site operations. This is the 7-category MMC definition that MHCLG published. And I see all 7 of those categories being relevant. And some of them you see here in this graphic shows you the sort of things that are going to get looked at more and more, ranging from off-site manufacture to on-site technology and more effective working. And also really important for advisors, particularly project managers and surveyors, not to go bargain basement shopping. The lowest price isn't going to be the right price in the time ahead. And so I think there needs to be a balance between getting value for money in a price compression market, but actually making sure everyone still makes money. It's important people make profit, otherwise you don't have a sustainable model. And also the use of technology to do simulations, looking at sequence, looking at logistics, looking at manpower scheduling. All of that's going to be really, really important. And combining that with use of technology and design to automate some of the things that are done quite intensively now, even by consultants. Clients will want more certainty earlier, and the only way you're going to be doing that is using technology to augment what we do as professionals. So to summarize, everyone's going to need really good judgment and advice in the period ahead. It's going to be a rocky road, but you will need to really sort of think deeply about some of the decisions you make. The existing projects still to complete are going to have major challenges. There's no point in trying to deflect from that. Cost, time, quality, and avoiding dispute are big issues. We have weakened resiliency that I've tried to explain, which means we've got a volatile market. The amplified nature of that is going to be significant, I think. We need to avoid following the market down, use intelligent client briefing, get clients to make decisions based on outcomes, not just on inputs. And I think we're going to see more interest in terms of vertically integrated procurement models, vertically integrated delivery from contractors, working with their supply chains, and also use of MMC and technology on an increased basis. So all of that really sums up as being a choice for everyone as to whether they want to use this crisis to regress and to go back to business as usual, potentially store up a massive problem for the future when we do recover, or to get on with changing things now. So I'll probably leave it there. I'm conscious of time. Happy to take questions, Lee.
Hi, thanks, Mark. No, that was absolutely fascinating. Gosh, a lot to take in. I think I'll need to look through those slides again. But no, there's lots of things to consider there, Mark. And, I think you're right. In everything we're discussing now, it needs to be a springboard for positive change. But it seems like, we've all got to work together and we've got to share these best practices. But there is such a degree of sort of unpredictability about it all. But no, fascinating. Let's go straight to questions because we do have, I think, about 5 minutes. I'm just going to kick off, if that's possible, with one that's been sent in from one of our members. So this was, Mark, if you were head of procurement for a major UK client, what would be on your agenda? How would your relationship with the supply chain change? And how would you manage and share risk?
Yeah, so I think the obvious answer to that will be I will try and practice what I preach, which is to procure intelligently. And I think that's the key thing that clients need to be thinking about. We have intelligent clients who do a lot of development work and are corporate occupiers, and they probably need less help because they will be able to make those decisions, and others will need consultants to advise them. But for me, it's about trying to get closer and collaborating more with the supply chain. It's about building relationships, because the thing that's been shown in the last 8 weeks is if you have lowest tender-based relationships, well, you don't have relationships really, you have transactions, and that doesn't lead to sustainable models where you have the ability to trust outcomes or to be able to rely on what happens. So I build deeper relationships. Certainly if you have a development program, you need to leverage that to show the supply chain what you're going to be building looking ahead, how you can then work with the the supply chain to be more intelligent around the design, the move towards manufacturer-led solutions, increasing pre-manufactured value where possible, looking at quality, how you assure that with the supply chain, and overall just think differently about how you incentivize as well. It's not about lowest price, it's about incentivizing on the outcomes that you create.
Brilliant. Now, I've noticed here on the questions, I think you can see them as well there, Mark. You've got one from the former Housing Minister here, Mark Prisk. Great presentation, Mark. He likes it. How can government best help to reduce contract tensions and to strengthen business confidence?
So yeah, I think that government has a key role to play here, and I say this quite a lot in terms of government taking a leadership position when it comes to construction. So even though public spend is only about 30% of total industry output, government can clearly lead. It can lead from the front around showing how to procure, just based on the question you just asked. How can it procure differently? How can it actually financially administer in terms of things like retentions and payment? Lead from the front. So if government departments, and there's some government departments with big spend programs ahead of them, such as the DFE and DHSC, that if they can actually demonstrate what good looks like, it will help the private sector then move towards that. Clearly, there's expectations around a stimulus package on trying to put a floor under industry contraction in the period ahead. The housing market, which is where I work, will be looking closely to see how the government looks to keep up numbers of homes being delivered per annum. I think to do that, it needs to be a bit more diverse around the types of homes, around tenure. It needs to certainly, in my view, also diversify the market. It was already looking to do that under its policy, but push diversification around new people on the pitch, new players on the pitch, new modes of delivery, new tenures, so we have a more resilient housing market going forward.
And I think there's a few things that have come in on modern methods of construction, obviously, which you do champion so well. And there's a guy here, Tom Smallbone, who said, will the MMC sector be likely to struggle if there are deflationary pressures upon them? It seems that they are reliant on volume, and macroeconomic circumstances obviously may result in reductions in volume.
Yeah, it's a really good question, because everything I've just described there around the complexity of price pressures around labour, plant, material, one of the things that I say is going to be a driver of any deflation is labour rate compression. So if you have a labour intensive traditional construction process and labour gets cheaper, then there is an argument for saying, actually, well, we'll just continue doing what we're doing because any lack of productivity is offset by site labour compression. Whereas in MMC, the businesses tend to have fixed overheads of manufacturing, of facilities and plant and equipment, and they tend to employ their staff on a payroll basis rather than self-employed. So the ability to flex rates is going to be more of a challenge. There is a challenge there, but actually it's back to the point I also made about procurement, that clients need to think beyond the lowest price and think about the outcome. I'm increasingly of the opinion that the quality of work that's going to get delivered traditionally in the coming period, and particularly when we come out the other side of this and look to expand again, is going to get even worse. So the ability to control outcomes around skills, competency, quality of site-based delivery is going to be under pressure like never before. So I think the intelligent clients will see through that and understand that actually the other benefits, including speed and certainty, and particularly if we have a reoccurrence of the pandemic and there's another need for a lockdown, if you have a high pre-manufactured value solution, you're going to be in better shape.
No, that's absolutely brilliant. Well, there's a few more questions. Is there anything there that you want to take, Mark, at the end of this? Anything you feel you've not covered?
What have we got here? I'm just scrolling through. Should large house builders develop their own MMC or work with the existing smaller suppliers and modular? That's an interesting question. And actually, I think what you've got at the moment is a market doing both, and I think you'll continue to see that. So Berkeley and Countryside, for instance, are developing their own vertically integrated models. They obviously will have more control, but they also have more risk around having fixed overhead, whereas the Barratt type model is to work with the supply chain, which makes it more flexible, but they have less control. So there's ups and downs for both approaches. My personal viewpoint would be, if you really want to be serious about changing a longer-term delivery model, you need to control the outcome and vertically integrate MMC capability, as Tony Pidgley has done with at Berkeley, for instance.
No, that's brilliant. Well, we're just about out of time, so that's a perfect way of ending. But thanks so much, Mark, for taking the time to sort of show us the slides and talk us through. So I know I'm thanking you on behalf of all our audience. And just quickly to end, just to say that this video will be, and I know lots of people have actually asked on the chat, Is the video going onto YouTube? Yes, it will be on our YouTube channel tomorrow for you all to view. And I know the slides will be up shortly. So our next event, it's half term next week. Some people might be taking a small break, but after half term, we've got June the 1st, and we're going to be having a Monday morning motivation with Steve Edge, who is very charismatic. He's going to be talking about bringing your brand through and out of COVID-19. And then June the 4th, we'll be doing one of our views from the top interviews with Bill Hughes, obviously Head of Real Assets at Legal and General Investment Management. So lots to look forward to. And thank you for viewing today. I do hope you get a chance to look at this and forward the video to your friends. So thank you so much. Keep safe. Take care from our family to yours.